Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's live stream. This is one that we've had planned for a little while, but unfortunately had to postpone because I was ill, and then or life just gets in the way sometimes. But I'm very happy that we are back streaming tonight, and we have a fantastic guest this evening. I'm very excited for our conversation this evening. And if you have any questions for tonight's guest, put them in the chat and I will try and get to them. But tonight's guest is an ethnographer, researcher, writer, and expert on the online and offline participation of women in conspiratorial and right wing movements. She is currently writing a book that traces in intimate ethnographic detail the lives and worldviews of several women who were arrested for their role in the Capitol Insurrection on January 6th, 2021. She has also been working on the upcoming documentary film by Page75 Productions titled The Conspiracists, which I had the privilege of being able to watch. And let me tell you, it is absolutely fantastic. People in my audience will absolutely love this documentary. I can guarantee it. Her work is a much needed empathetic look at the real life consequences of falling down the conspirituality rabbit hole. And I am so excited that she is tonight's guest. Please welcome Noelle Cook. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You are, I'm very happy to have you. How are you doing? I always ask my guests this, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
That's
It's a nice break today to be with you.
Whereabouts are you based, Noelle?
Southern California.
Oh, nice. I'm kind of jealous of that. There's going to be some nice weather you've got there.
Yes, it's pretty hot today, actually.
So getting into what our topic is tonight, documenting conspirituality. Well, before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your life and your work kind of before you got involved in this very strange world of conspirituality.
Well, in my former life, I was actually a stay-at-home mom for 22 years. And when I got divorced, I decided to go back to school. And so I had an undergraduate program in 2021 where I started to study social movements and gendered paths of radicalization and participation. And so that is how I started looking at social movements and movements in general.
Right. So conspirituality is it's become kind of, it's a relatively new term, right? Kind of came about like in the kind of post QAnon world. For people that I don't know if I'm 100% right. Okay. But for people that might not be familiar with what this idea of conspirituality is, like how would you just describe it to just like a random person who didn't know what it was?
Well, conspirituality is actually a term that was coined in 2011 by two sociologists who were looking at the convergence of New Age spiritualism, which attracted a lot of female participants, particularly females interested in self-care, and alternative health. And it was a convergence of that with conspiratorial thinking, conspiracies that was often male dominated and was primarily focused on global politics. And so it was kind of the convergence of those two things, which is so it's conspiracies and New Age spiritualism melded together. The interesting part is it goes beyond New Age spiritualism now also, and you get a lot of very fundamentalist evangelical people also following, which is kind of a contradiction.
Yeah, could that be do trad wives kind of fit into that kind of bracket as well? Right.
They can, because you've got the ones who are staying home to farm and raise organic foods, to make sure that their children are having like all homeopathic remedies. So that fits in with it. Then you have the other trad wives, the biblical trad wives that are trying to, they will dabble in conspiracies. So when I kind of describe what I've seen and with all of these different movements kind of converging, especially since 2020, it's a melting pot of of this stuff. And I look at it like a trade show where there's different, and I actually came up with the trade show metaphor when I went to the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles in 2023.
Oh, you've got to tell me more about the Conscious Life Expo, because that's like, if I could choose like one event that I don't want to go to, but my research
Yeah.
brain really wants to go to, that would probably be the one that I chose.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. I went in 23 and in 24. 23 it was visually so appealing. Everywhere you look, there was something to photograph, and I love photography. So that was what I was really interested in, was just how visually fascinating it was. And I came home and kind of went through the photo, which is what I do. I take pictures and then I go look at the pictures and see what they mean, right? And so that was where I got the metaphor of a trade show, because there's all these booths set up, and so you'll have this tarot card reader, the old school astrologers, the tarot card readers, next to Mickey Willis, who's there to promote his film The Plandemic. And there's talks of is creating new schools for their kids, and is again taking vouchers, private schools, charter schools. And I start to think, wow, this is okay. So anti-vax, we got Del Bigtree there that day too. And I'm thinking Del Bigtree was at January 6th. He was doing a rally outside the Capitol that day for the health freedom movement. And so I started to see how are these two men here in the midst of this? And then this year in 2024, I went again, and this time Lee Dundas is there. And she's an organizer from the 2022 Freedom Convoy, which was one of the versions of the truck convoy, right? Who's also connected to people who are doing the Take Our Borders Back convoy in 2024. And so you kind of see that there's this whole trade show. Everyone assists each other in selling their product, and participants and people who are attendees can walk around and pick up the swag off each table, put it in their bag, go home and dump it out, see what fits. If maybe the militia fits today, maybe trad wife stuff fits. We got Warrior Mom, who's talking about the dangers of vaccines, who's giving out her keychains. And so that's kind of what it reminds me of, because no one really takes time to look into the ideology that they're now repping. And just kind of, and it becomes this whole swirl of pretty much, now we got Flat Earth also as another group. And I love that when I get to see them arguing about the Flat Earth versus, whether the moon's hollow, and it's just it's a lot.
It's interesting because, like you said, a lot of the people that kind of get into New Age spirituality don't tend to know the origins of a lot of the like where their beliefs come from. And it's the same with conspiracies. I think one of the things that I find interesting through research is trying to figure out like what's the first point, like where did this thing start? And it's like, like the kind of conspiracies that are peddled at these kind of conventions, like like you said, moon is hollow, reptilians. Like you can actually, like when you do the work, you can actually trace them back quite easily, like find the origin point.
Yeah, it goes back. I mean, and these are all recycled over and over and over again. Going back decades, if not longer. And I was not an expert in conspiracies. I was not. When I started this project, it was because I had gone down to DC on January 6th to photograph the Stop the Steal rally, to try to get pictures of that movement, the protest signs, because it was COVID and field research was kind of off the table at that point, because there was nothing you could do in person. And so when I went down to DC, I had no idea what I would be stepping into, but I got down there late. So I went straight over to the Capitol, because that's where I saw everyone heading. They were already there, and they had just breached the Capitol when I arrived, because a police officer at the kiosk on the Lower Senate Park told me to be careful, and that they had just breached the Capitol. But I couldn't quite imagine what that meant, since there was no air support, no sirens, So I got a lot of pictures. And came home and trying to make sense of them. And so I started following these women onto social media to see what they were about, what they were affiliated with. I did a lot of research in public records, in newspapers, court records. I tried to make sense of how they got to the Capitol that day. And ironically, I looked at the first 100 women, and the only real pattern that emerged was generational. And so many of them were middle-aged women like me, that I was even more fascinated to, knowing that they all had probably families and grandchildren, children that they were still responsible for, and wondering, why they'd be willing to do something so reckless. Um, and in the process of that, by following these women, I found that each of them took different paths, right? Many of them at that point in 2021 had found some version of conspirituality and seemed to lean into that even heavier after the violence of January 6th. And I, just still don't know exactly. No one will really tell me specifically why that was, but as an observation, it seemed to me that it was a way of distancing themselves from what turned out to be a pretty masculine event with a lot of violence and a lot of violent rhetoric. And although there were plenty of women that participated in that, I found that a lot of them like to take a step back. Several of them took a step back and wanted to soften it up a bit, which is what conspirituality does allow. It allows for a softening of the violence.
Absolutely. What was it like? So you went to, when you went to the Capitol on January 6th, had you already kind of started this project of looking at women in kind of extremist right-wing movements?
No, I didn't know what I was going to look at yet. The only thing I had studied masculinity in my undergraduate program in anthropology, but this, I wasn't sure what I was going to get. I just knew I was interested in social movements and the political moment, and this was an opportunity for a rally. There's a lot of visual interest, and I like visual anthropology, so I've been at so many other DC events, like starting with the Women's March in 2017. And then I went again in 18. I went to Climate March, Science March. I went to everything they had. And so I have a whole collection of really great photos. These were different, obviously, but this is what set me down that path, is just trying to understand the women, because they were all my age. It's primarily Gen X and young boomers that were the first 100 women arrested. And then many of them leave social media wide open. So you can go on, and what I hadn't expected is after the first year of doing this first 9 months of doing it from a distance, I finally, one of the women in the documentary that you saw was starting to post some things I just didn't understand anymore, conspirituality pieces of it. And so I finally reached out in Messenger and asked her a question about it. And I wasn't expecting her to send me her cell phone number and ask me to call her. So she could explain that way, but she did. And so we talked that day, and she explained my question, and we talked the next day, and the next day after that, and 3 years later, we kept talking. And so that's been what's really fascinating about this project, is I've been doing it over a 3-year period of time, and not just watching their evolution or changes, but my own in how I experienced this entire thing. So it's been
So when you went to the Capitol, were you aware of like QAnon? Did you know what QAnon was?
I heard of, yes, I did know what it was, but I was not, most of what I saw got cleaned up because Facebook and Twitter had banned a lot of those accounts, right? And so I only saw bits and pieces of it. I wasn't setting out to study conspiracies or QAnon. But I had no choice, unfortunately, because that's where I literally wanted to have these women lead me where they were going, and to just follow them at a distance until I decided to put myself beside them and talk to them and understand what this was.
Just on January 6th, just because it's interesting because you were there, and I've only ever seen it on TV documentaries and news reports. Obviously, I remember when it happened. What was it like actually? Like, now, a couple of years on from it, we've had all like documentaries about it that've kind of pieced together like what happened, like a play-by-play. How does that kind of correlate with what you experienced there, like your experience versus kind of what happened there?
My experience was strange because we were on the east front of the Capitol, which was the side, not the scaffold side, not the tunnel side. I knew something was wrong the minute I could see the building from across the street, because you could see bodies all up against the doors in the building. And on any given day, the normal policy is you can't set foot on the building, even the bottom step off the parking lot. You can't do that. And so I knew something was strange and wrong at that point. I stayed a great distance away from the building. I had a 400 zoom lens, so I relied on that. It was COVID. I was concerned about that. But the interesting thing was throughout these last 3 years, I've been able to move freely around any space I want to be in. And I don't lie to people or trick them. I don't have to say anything at all because I'm a white middle-aged woman. And the fact that I'm there, it's automatically assumed that I'm one of them, or I think the same way as them. And I don't attack them. I don't try to change people's minds or to counter protest. I'm there to observe and learn and understand what I'm seeing and what it means to them. So it's been an interesting experience. I did not experience the violence except for that. The side I was on the east side, I had moved off onto a sidewalk away from the building because someone came out the door and yelling someone had been shot inside. Again, I'm thinking that was impossible based on what I was seeing happening around me. But sure enough, EMTs came and took Ashley Babbitt's body out off the east side of the building. And that was when I decided I should probably leave because I didn't, you don't get cell service in DC when there's that many people. Right. And so I wasn't getting texts from anyone. I had no way of checking the internet to see what was happening. I just knew something was seriously wrong. And I wandered around the front, or the west front, and saw what was going on over there from I was across the street near the fountains. So I did not ever get near the building. But I had no idea until I got home that night and actually saw news what had happened in the tunnels. Gosh. And what happened to law enforcement. I did see that. As soon as word got out that Ashley Babbitt had been shot, literally the entire crowd turned on the police. Everyone started screaming traitors and cowards and much more vulgar stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's kind of, I guess, like, this is just my thoughts as well, like, on this, but there's often, I don't know, like, maybe I take a too empathetic approach, but people are very, like, kind of dismissive, and we'll get into the film in a second, but there is a part of your upcoming documentary. What's the area called outside in DC every Friday where they do the
Freedom Corner,
and it's Ashley Babbitt's mother that is there. There's
along with Nicole Ruffett. Ashley Babbitt's mother started it in August of 2022. Nicole Ruffett, who is the wife of an incarcerated man from January 6th, has joined for pretty much the duration, I believe. It's attracted other people that have come and become regulars, including streamers that had been with the truck convoy groups. Right. And just kind of moved from event to event with their streaming.
See, I kind of, and that was it was a very moving scene in the documentary. I have, even though I find the belief systems absolutely deplorable, I can't help but think that a lot of these people have been radicalized. And specifically in the case of Ashley Babbitt, that radicalization by, like, conspirituality movements, all of these things kind of coming together that led someone like her to the Capitol on January 6th, culminated in her death.
Yeah, I don't know much about Ashley Babbitt. She's not one that I've actually done research onto her past life. So I don't know I don't really know what the driving force was behind that for her. Yeah. But yes, it is sad. It does destroy lives. And the lives I have been involved in, I've watched that. I saw the destruction back in 2021, and I've watched more destruction occur since then.
Absolutely. So, in terms of, like, the demographics, we say it's middle-aged women, and you sent me an introduction to the book that you're currently writing, which, again, very excited to read it. But you talked about, I think you maybe quoted something in there. It was about how middle-aged white women were called super spreaders of misinformation.
Yeah, there was a study that came out recently that's, I think it was confined to Twitter or X, where they were looking at the spread of disinformation and the speed of light at which it travels now. And they found that I'm going to phrase this wrong, but they found that most of the disinformation was coming from a small number of accounts that were doing it, that belonged to these middle-aged women or older women. And they found that older women are indiscriminately retweeting things. And so that assists. And I started to watch my own behavior, and I could find myself oftentimes starting to retweet without reading something. I'm like, stop it. Because you try, either you see someone you trust who's posting it, the lead catches your attention and sounds like something you support, and then you just click without really looking at it. And I think that's a problem, and it's a huge problem in my generation.
That makes me think as well about when you said how easy it was to get in contact with some of these women, and how kind of there's a level of trust here, very trusting,
Yes.
like giving out a phone number,
yes.
and then you're talking on the phone.
Yeah, not just a level of trust in that regard for personal privacy, but then the stories that were shared with me. That was kind of immediate, actually, which was surprising because, again, I was curious, genuinely curious, and I was very interested in hearing what they had to tell me, and I asked a lot of questions, and I shared a lot of my own life with them, and that was what was interesting too. Is over a period of time, as these conversations were had, it was only natural to start talking. Most of our conversations centered on our own personal lives and had very little to do with almost nothing to do with politics. In fact, not once was I ever asked who I'd voted for or how I felt about different culture war issues, because most of our time was spent talking about our lives as middle-aged women and the experiences we've had in these. And that was what was so interesting, to the level of intimacy that they were willing to delve into their own lives and share with me. And Tammy, for example, the woman in Pennsylvania, had said that she was talking about some of these things for the very first time in her life. And this is a woman whose entire life has been riddled with nothing but tragedy, year after year. If I was writing a book that was fiction, the editor would say, take half of this out, it's just not realistic. But it's all stuff that I had actually verified before I was speaking to her through public records. I already knew this about her. And then she shared it with me. And I realized these people really want someone to listen to. Tammy told me that for years she's been trying to get mental health care for various tragedies that have occurred, but can never find it. Her housing's always precarious. And so she'll get put on a wait list for 3 months for an opening. And by the time she might be in 2.5 months of the wait, she loses her housing, and now she's moved an hour further out. And so you see the struggles, and with someone like Tammy, I can understand when systems that are supposed to be in place to assist you and help you have failed you so miserably across the board from the time you were 20 years old. I can see how it made more sense to me to see the level of dissociation that I was looking at, because
Absolutely.
When that's what your reality looks like 24/7. Yeah, I think one of her coping mechanisms is to dissociate into a world of conspiracy.
Absolutely. I'm going to play the trailer for the film The Conspiracists, just so everybody has an idea of who Tammy and Ivonne are.
January 6th was a setup. I made national news hanging out the window. So more importantly is that they're being stripped.
So I'm here with Ivonne at Freedom Corner. You were just convicted for January 6th. And
I was just sentenced.
It does feel like the world's going slightly mad, right?
Right, but that it's just darkness being exposed. We've never been to the moon. They're lying.
We've never been to the moon.
Not through traveling through space.
yeah, they control the weather. They modify hard. There's a set. Who controls the weather? The elite.
And I'm like, what the heck? So I go, and this is before I knew about McDonald's too. I got myself an Egg McMuffin.
What about McDonald's? They use human meat.
Use human meat.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
So when you're terrified, your adrenaline glands pump adrenaline into your blood, and they drink the blood of terrified people. And that is what keeps them younger. And it also...
Who drinks the blood of terrorists?
These elite pedophiles.
My head's exploding.
I hope that your documentary comes out in time, but to be truth, I think the shift will become before then. And maybe this trip is just meant to help you raise your consciousness.
How exhausted are you?
Physically or mentally? I think the mental exhaustion just comes from the realization of just how far gone so many people in this country are. Not just this country, globally.
So that will kind of give people a bit more of an idea of who we're talking about. Because we're going to talk about the two women. The film kind of mostly follows Ivonne, but you also have Tammy in it, so I was quite a big character in it. So before we kind of get into the intricacies, tell us a little bit about how the documentary came to be.
Well, I had been doing my research, like I said, from March 2021, and I started working with Liz, the director of the film, on a different project. I had been put in contact with her because she was looking for someone to do research on a different topic. So during the process of that, as we got to talking and to know each other more, and I started sharing more about my research, she got more interested in it. And at some point, she decided she wanted to include it in a series of films she was doing. And so that's how this film came about. And then in summertime, at some point, Ivonne called me and asked me if I would be, I had been planning to go to her sentencing. I had gone to her trial and I was planning to go to the sentencing. And she called to say that she had to drive one of her children's cars from Ohio back to Idaho. And would I be willing to travel with her from DC to pick up the car and then caravan back to Idaho? And so Liz and I were already planning to go and talk to Tammy and film. And so Ivonne decided to come along with us to do that. And the road trip, I think, was a good vehicle, pardon the pun, to create this story around, to make it somewhat coherent, because it's a challenge to tell stories about people that believe things that are off the mainstream.
Absolutely. So the plan was to make a documentary about conspirituality, or like what was the kind of like you didn't really did you go into it thinking that this was going to be the end product?
No. When I went into it, I thought we were filming Tammy, and I wasn't sure what else we were going to be filming at that point. Like, I wasn't sure where else we were going with this. But I think it all kind of, when I first talked to Liz about whether was she going to be good with going on this trip with us, she said, yeah, definitely. So made an adventure out of it. And then she went home with hours and hours and hours of footage and had to make sense of it to tell a story.
So let's start with Ivonne. So tell me a little bit more about Ivonne. Like, who is she? What does she believe in? What kind of got her to the Capitol on January 6th?
So Ivonne is my age. We're a month apart, actually. I'm 1 month older than she is. And Ivonne was someone that was interesting, because when I first saw Ivonne after January 6th through the media, they chose like a still from one of the videos of her. That was literally the most insane looking picture, right? So I had to kind of create some rules for myself, right, about how I was going to do this. And I didn't know what I was going to be dealing with and or what kind of hate I might encounter. I didn't encounter any, as a matter of fact. Everyone's been very nice to me, because I've treated them with respect and dignity. And it's amazing what happens when you do that. And I think when I first met Ivonne, she surprised me. I saw a photo of her taken on her 53rd birthday. She was vibrant. She was beautiful. And she had a very expressive face. And when I spoke to her on the phone, she was very kind and wanted to share all of this knowledge she had with me. And I wasn't expecting any of that. And then, I think what happened over time is, as we got to know each other better, and again, we were not talking politics or conspiracies. We were talking about experiences in our own lives. You can't help but start to see a person there, right? This isn't just someone from my spreadsheet. Now, this is a person. And I started becoming aware at some point of feelings of empathy that I struggled with. And I thought, well, why am I struggling with this, right? It's okay to have empathy. There's a difference between empathy and sympathy, and you can still have empathy and believe in consequences. And so,
absolutely,
that's how I worked through year 2.
Yeah.
And so Ivonne is a true believer, 100%. And I know CNN did a layout on her back in spring of 2021. Not long after the insurrection. And that story is actually one of the best out there. It was one of the first, because Ivonne's very honest, and she will share whatever you want to know. She will tell you. And so she was honest with CNN. The only difference of the story I got over time was that as she got more comfortable with me, Ivonne's savvy enough to know how much she can give her audience in one sitting, right? She knows her audience. And so she might not say to CNN, I'm a Pleiadian. But, I got that by year 2. She was telling me she was a starseed. She was a Pleiadian. She was an advanced being here to help usher humanity into Earth in 5D, which is heaven on Earth. And so that's when I really started to learn even more. That was when I decided to go to the Conscious Life Expo in 2023, so I could try to, not to be too woo, but I wanted to feel what it felt like, what that, what it was like to be in those kinds of spaces with people who all believe these things. And it was pretty normal, except for you start to realize what I really found the most difficult at the Conscious Life Expo is to see how many booths are promising miracles and how many desperate people are there lined up ready to pay for those miracles. And then and in 2024, when I went again this year, I didn't see the visual stuff that I saw the year before that I wanted to take. It was all the same, pretty much, but the visual appeal had lost its glimmer for me. And now I'm just looking at the grift. And I'm looking at people who are literally, watching a loved one in their final days of something like pancreatic cancer, where they're desperate for anything. And they're willing to pay people who are selling a scam. And that started to make me more disgusted by the industry in general. And, but Ivonne is a true believer, and she continued that throughout these entire last 3 years. To the point that it's got her 30 months in prison because she was offered a plea deal for January 6th. She did not destroy property, and she did not commit violence against police officers if you don't count bodies being part of the weapon, right? She did make her way straight up to the front lines, and she turned around facing the crowd and held her body firmly against the bike racks as a barrier to police trying to clear people off the bike rack. So, she and then she got pushed out of the tunnel. She went into the tunnel, got sent out of the tunnel, and then crawled back in through a broken window.
Yeah, there's footage of her in the tunnel.
Yeah.
Which is like
from the trial.
Yeah,
that's evidence from a body camera, from a body camera or CCTV, depending on which one you're talking about. But and when she went to her trial, she opted to have a jury trial, and she opted to take the stand in her own defense against her attorney's advice. And I think some of the first words out of her mouth were, I'm a divine sovereign being. I don't recognize your jurisdiction. Everything I do is directed through me by spirit and places me where I need to be to get the job done. And I remember sitting there next on that bench in that courtroom and hearing that. And I remember almost going like an audible gasp, but I don't think it was that loud. But because I knew she told me that she was going to do that, but I couldn't believe when time came to do it, she did. And she'd been offered a plea. She probably would have done maybe 30, 60, 90 days in jail, if that. But she, government was asking for 33 months. And this is one of the first cases of a woman where she got almost exactly what the government was asking for. She got 30 months, 2.5 years. And she could have probably gotten away with a lot less if she had taken the plea. But she was, again, not going to lie to make it easier for herself. She believes that she signed a soul contract and that everything that's happening to her in this lifetime was something she's already agreed to do.
Well, she also didn't think that it was going to happen, right? She was very adamant that no, things are going to happen beforehand.
Yeah, that was going on before the trial. She didn't think the trial would happen, and she didn't think sentencing would happen, and she didn't think she'd actually go to jail, but she did. And I think she kept holding out for these conspiracies to come true, that the white hats were going to enter the room and expose the truth, and light was going to overtake dark, and that would be it. And
it's such a strange belief system, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started the stream, that you can use it to justify almost anything. You can just change it a little bit, And it's like, okay, this isn't going to happen because these people are going to step in. Okay, it is happening. Obviously, I must be contracted to do this. This must be my path in life. Like, it's so meldable to anything that you want.
Yes, and that's why trying to combat it with actual facts doesn't work. I didn't do a whole lot of that. Sometimes, particularly Tammy would ask me for resources on different pieces of information, and I would go find it for her, and then I would share it, and I would tell her this is not government-funded information. This is from a private institution or a private entity of some kind. Whether or not it actually ever made much of a difference, I don't think so. We just, with Tammy, we just didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about conspiracies much. She would start to talk to me about how it's the whole money thing, right? How everybody's going to get these. I forget. I don't even want to remember that whole conspiracy. But how
the Nasara Jasara.
Yes, exactly. All the money's going to have to come back to us. And I didn't say anything. And she goes, "I know you're a skeptic, but just think good thoughts, can you?" And I was like, "I can always think good thoughts for you. Yes, I can do that. I can wish you the best."
It's so depressing because I get like the things like I did quite a bit of research on Nasara and Jessara because it ties in with my like fixation, which is kind of these ascended master cults that all kind of began in the 1930s, well, kind of has its roots back in the Theosophical Society, but then moves into the 1930s with Guy Ballard. Yeah,
I've had to learn all of this because of these women. Okay, I had never heard of this before. I never heard of I Am. Never heard of this. I cannot tell you the number of rabbit holes I've had to spend weeks in learning. Which always spur about 10 other rabbit holes I decided to go down too. They have nothing to do.
They're all interconnected. But in the Nasara Jessara stuff, the original there's the documentary Waiting for Nasara, and the original woman who was Shiny Goodwin was putting out she called herself the Dove of Oneness. And Saint Germain was all linked in with that, and Saint Germain was going to bring in a new monetary system, and it all just goes back to. And again, this is what I was saying earlier. Like you can trace this stuff back, but nobody that believes in it ever seems to trace it back. They just find the person that they latch onto, and they go, "Oh, but this sounds good," and it does sound good because it's an erasure of all debt in the world. It's essentially a form of like basic income,
right?
It's very like it's quite a socialist proposition, but these people, a lot of them are kind of on the right, but if you market things to them in a certain package, and it's very appealing because those kind of conspiracies, because they don't like get at the core of the issue of like the actual very real material issues, but they provide like this nice kind of like a soothing balm over it. It's like don't worry about actually like trying to materially change anything in the world, because I'm going to give you this nice conspiracy that's going to make you feel really good, and then you're going to think that the white hats are coming to change your life for the better.
Well, yeah, that's why you just sit back with your popcorn and watch the movie.
Yeah, exactly. It encourages a kind of that's the thing. It encourages just kind of like not doing anything, right? Just totally because if everything is pre-written, what is the point of doing anything?
Exactly.
You don't need to protest, you don't need to strike, you don't need to be actively involved in trying to change your material conditions, because everything is already predetermined for you,
right?
It's incredibly it's incredibly, it's very useful for like, the very real bad elements of like the status quo, to have a whole, group of people that are completely just disenfranchised from
right. And now they've also added sovereign citizen language into it too. So there's all of that, the United States corporation stuff going on as well. It's kind of crazy, but you're right. At the end of the day, I started realizing I don't even need to understand what they're talking about half the time. I mean, I unfortunately understand too much of it, but it's like, because at the end of your spiel, the bottom line is you agreed to this. So that's all I need to know, because you can justify, rationalize anything if that's really your belief system that you're holding true. Now Tammy is not the true believer like Ivonne is.
Right.
I think Tammy is what I would say uses the method of hope with her. She uses conspiracies as a form of hope. I think that is to compensate for loneliness, isolation, absolute constant chaos in her life, with not just her own life, but her children's lives, and now the lives of her grandchildren, right? You can watch this, you can watch how this works its way down generations. And I can understand some of the conspirituality has actually put her in a much better place mental health wise, because there is all that self-love. Is all this, these ideas about hope and light and something really great is coming, where there's all this abundance and prosperity for everyone. And, so I've seen her become much more optimistic and positive over the last couple of years. I also see her becoming a little less isolated in that she has, for example, when she would go to Trump rallies in Pennsylvania after January 6th, I almost never heard her going to talk about Trump. What she was doing was going there to meet up with her, quote, Telegram fam, right? People she talked to on her channel and people who she engaged with on an everyday basis. And so her pictures would come back, and it was always with her and these various personalities from Telegram. And she would come back energized and excited. And it had been a reminder that she really is part of something physical also, because these people came to life in a real way at these rallies for her. But for her, it really is a way of participating and belonging, and it does give her purpose.
So it's less about Trump as a political figure that she backs everything that he says. It's more community.
Yes, but in the community, when you're in a community that backs everything Trump says, you then parrot that too.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to determine what's belief and what's culturally acceptable in your community.
Absolutely.
Because if you really start to break down certain questions, if I were to leave Trump's name out of it, but talk about certain things and ask them, would you want this to happen? There's a good chance the answer is no, most of the time. It's the same thing with their racism and homophobia. Sometimes it's blatant and obvious how they feel, but and other times they just don't get it, or don't want to get it, I should probably say. Tammy's got Black grandchildren that she absolutely adores, but yet she will share memes that are definitely racist, or anti-Semitic, or they don't. But if you ask them, I don't hate anybody. I love everybody. Everybody's equal.
Yeah, it's always that strange cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's bizarre. There's
a lot of that here as well. I mean, when we were going to do this the last time, was the weekend that there was crazy riots all across the UK, extreme right wing fascist riots, and a lot of the people that go to that, they're participating in literal race riots, but a lot of them will tell you, "Oh, I'm not racist."
Right.
And it's like, you're trying to burn a hotel because it's migrants in.
Right.
And you're telling me you're not racist. It's baffling how you can get to a point where you think those two things are true for you at the same time.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know what you do with that exactly, because that's been the challenge for me, is how do you combat some of that? How do we, the homophobia is another one. Ivonne's got a gay son. I have a gay son. Tammy had a trans daughter. And yet everybody spews anti-trans and homophobia. I don't understand it.
And she was very accepting of her trans child.
Tammy?
As well, right? Yeah, like as accepting as you could imagine for a MAGA follower.
She didn't reject them or disown them. That's true.
Yeah.
I don't think Sabrina would call it accepting in the beginning.
Right.
I think that there is a lot of anger and confusion and a lot of not understanding on Tammy's part. And I think what Tammy really objected to was when Sabrina had her children call her mom.
Right.
That seemed to be the tipping point for her of what was unacceptable. In the end, though, she did accept it, and she did try to say Sabrina when she could, and she did withhold her advice and comments as best she could. But yeah, Sabrina ended up committing suicide in September of 2022, which is when my project was no longer part of my grad school program. I one of the rules I had was not to do anything to change outcomes, right? Because if I'm observing and just trying to observe and see what things mean to them, I can't interfere to change an outcome. And in Tammy's case, I did. I made a conscious decision to put the academic piece on hold and to get involved personally, because Sabrina committed suicide in a county jail, a county prison in Pennsylvania, where the guards had known her before her transition, because she had been in there before, and then when she was in there as Sabrina. And you can imagine in Lycoming County, Pennsylvania, what that must have been like for Sabrina in that county prison. She complained of sexual harassment, sexual abuse. Yeah. She had multiple psychological diagnoses that she was taking medications for that were withheld from her, along with hormones that were withheld from her. And so this is a person who their whole life has struggled with impulse control and other outbursts, and was put in solitary confinement constantly and ended up hanging herself in her cell. And Tammy called me first because, again, Tammy has nobody in her entire life that she could rely on, because everyone's either incarcerated or strung out on some drug or another, or asleep for 5 days because they've been up for 5 days before. And I think I learned so much in this process of not having those issues in my own family, in my own personal life, of watching the complications that occur when you're already living in such a precarious manner. It's like a house of cards. Literally, one card just gets jiggled the wrong way and it all collapses. And so when Tammy was sentenced, again, when Tammy went to the Capitol, she went on a bus with people from her town. She was super excited to do that because she was going to be with other people. She didn't have to go by herself for the first time and then forever. So she was really excited about the possibility of meeting new friends. And she took the bus, and she literally she went into the Capitol and left within about 10 minutes, I think. They went into a room. Someone was passing around Jack Daniels. She took a swig, was told to leave, and she did. So not that I'm excusing her, but again, I want to draw the distinction between what she was doing versus people smashing windows, beating police officers with flagpoles. She regretted it afterwards, and she even wrote a letter to her judge after her sentencing to apologize again, where she had nothing to gain from that, right? That was just purely because she respected her judge. She felt seen by her judge, I guess, even though he sentenced her to 20 days in jail. But I knew when she got sentenced, she was sentenced to the Philadelphia Federal Detention Center. That's about 3.5 hours from where she lives, where there is no public transportation locally, where she has no money for any kind of bus ticket or train ticket, nor does anyone in her family. So we were going to get together anyway. And I flew out to Pennsylvania the night before a couple days before she was supposed to report, to talk with her more about her story. And I drove her to prison. And, she actually made the best of prison too, because this is a woman who literally is isolated in this rural area, and has nobody. And so in some ways, prison kept her company. And, she also got mental health care. She was finally able to get a therapist assigned to her, but that was on probation. Probation was what allowed that.
When you see the film, there is, and I don't know if you would agree, but there's a big difference in Ivonne and Tammy as people, and you can, Tammy's story is, I mean, I don't know how much of her background you'd want to talk about on stream. Like I feel comfortable. I don't know how much you want to say. We're talking intense levels of trauma.
Yes. Intense levels of trauma. Like I said, if it was a fiction, you'd have me take half of it out because it wasn't realistic in one person's life. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, speaking of the House of Cards kind of stuff, right? Back in their early 2000s, I guess it was, she, two of her sons at the time, Sabrina was one of them at the time. Sabrina was about 10 and was in some special ed classes
Mm.
and had something worked out with the regular teacher that if she was irritated, agitated, whatever, she was allowed to get up, leave the room, and pace the hall, and come back and sit down. Well, there was a day when there was a substitute teacher there. And so when Sabrina got up to do that, the substitute teacher took a hold of the arm and said, sit back down. Sabrina knocked the hand off and they called it assault. Now, these are the immediate years after Columbine, and American schools had a zero tolerance policy. And in I think it was Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, there was a juvenile court judge there who was absolutely zero tolerance policy. And he did a bunch of scared straight type assemblies at the middle schools and high schools in town and said, if you ever end up in my courtroom, you will be locked up. Well, what he didn't tell them is that he had been in cahoots with a developer to replace the rundown county run facility with a private juvenile detention center. And that he and the chief judge in that county had conspired with that developer to receive kickbacks. And so it was in the judge's best interest to keep that facility filled. And so what he did is he started a scheme, and it was called Cash for Kids. And when Tammy first told me this story, when she first said the story, my kids were part of Cash for Kids. Of course, I immediately think this is a QAnon conspiracy because I hadn't heard about it. And I looked it up and I'm like, oh, it's a real thing. And her kids, Sabrina, at 10, 11 years old, ended up in that room because of that incident I described. And the judge's scheme included having his clerk explain to parents that they needed to waive their right to counsel. And if they did that, we could be in and out of here in 5 minutes. But if you don't, we could be here waiting all day for a public defender to show up. And so anyone who didn't have a private attorney available to them would sign that paper. And guess what happened? Immediately after the hearing, the kid's taken away and remanded into custody.
Yeah.
And it took her 2 years to get Sabrina back, and you can only imagine what happened in those 2 years of being held in detention.
Utterly outrageous.
Yes.
Like
it's two of her kids, two of them.
And it's like you said, like it sounds like a conspiracy, and
Right.
it is a conspiracy. It's a very real one.
A real one. And when you start to look at all of these different things that happen that do involve adults abusing children in some way, with their power, you can start to understand why QAnon doesn't feel quite as far-fetched to people like Tammy as it might you or me.
Absolutely.
Because in her life, there are pedophiles around every corner, and many of them have power. Absolutely.
This is probably a good time to play a clip from the film about they're talking about being mama bears. This is probably a good, so I'm going to play this clip.
That seems to be a big deal with various women's groups in this right-wing movements, where you can get away with a lot more in the way of violent rhetoric when you're doing it in defense of children.
They're coming for the kids in more ways than anyone has any idea.
We are the moms and the mama bears, and our children have been threatened.
So this it kind of correlates to what we're talking about. Like, this is an incredibly noble cause, right? Saving the children. Mm-hmm. Could you find another cause more noble than looking after the lives of children? And a question that I had was, do you think that some of this is motivated? I mean, in Tammy's case, obviously some of it could be motivated by past experiences, but do you think that some of it's also motivated by a sense of innate justice, and that kind of sense of like right and wrong is almost been manipulated by a lot of these, like, because like we were just saying, there are these very real conspiracies. Small town, Cash for Kids scandal, utterly horrific. I mean, we're talking like life-changing, life-destroying type things that are going on. And then you've got these other conspiracy theories like QAnon, the adrenochrome stuff, which we know isn't real, isn't true. that kind of manipulate this sense of you know, right and wrong, justice to kind of save the kids? It's a bit of a long-winded question.
No, but I mean, yes, you're right. Everything is framed around good versus evil, light versus dark. Yes. And yes, I think if you want to mobilize women, though, what are you going to do? And that was why COVID, I think, set so many women online. If you weren't already online, I think you have to remember, too, with this age group, with middle-aged women, my generation's in a weird stage, because our own children are grown up, but we're also at a stage in our history here where kids graduate from college and oftentimes come back home for a while. So it's not unusual to have 25, 26, 27-year-olds living in your house all over again. At the same time, our parents are getting older. And so many of us have caregiving responsibilities for our parents. That doesn't leave a lot of time or energy for social life or for getting out of your house and engaging in outside activities. And so most people sit online and they scroll through stuff and they click on stuff and they talk to people there. And you can see how that just kind of takes over and becomes reality after a while for so many people. And I think I think with COVID, that it was like a triple, quadruple whammy, right? Because now you had women who might not have been doing that before, or might not have spent the vast majority of their free time there before. But now they're given an opportunity to be heroes. We're going to find things that are going to boost our families' immune systems. We're going to, because health, children, education, these are all parts of the spheres that women are usually responsible for. So that's how they get to have their moment to shine. That's why we've got Moms for Liberty and Moms of America and all these different women's groups that are targeting schools, right? Anti-vax groups. Because again, you bring children into it, now women get to be fierce.
Yeah, and it's the people that want to ban any book that has any reference to anyone LGBTQ or any kind of sexual references to be banned out of schools, because heaven forbid a teenager might read it.
Which is interesting too, because sometimes it's confusing when you're talking love and light and everyone has this right to just be their own essence kind of thing. That's came up several times. Well, how do you explain your homophobia if that's the case? If everyone, well, again, you go back to the predetermination stuff, and it can be explained away because you're messing with God now, right? If God had intended you to be a man, He would have made you a man, or vice versa. And the same, and because transphobia has leapfrogged homophobia at this point, because I think at this point everybody has somebody in their life that they know is gay, and so it's easier to attack the trans population here. And so that's what I keep seeing, as well as we've kind of, with gay people, it's easy to say, well, they're just remembering traces of past lives and remembering moments of having been a woman or a man in a past life, and it's kind of excused as something just kind of benign and innocuous, whereas the transphobia stuff gets into the more aggressive rhetoric about, that's when you're really screwing with God's plan for you, and you're now teaching children that it's okay to mess with the predetermined plan.
The transphobia is just so mainstream now.
That's been amazing to watch, how this has all gone so mainstream so fast has been boggling to me.
To the point where we now have people like J.K. Rowling doing like a transvestigation on a boxer, like and turning that into this whole horrific attack.
Yeah, but if you look at her account, that goes back a couple of years. I mean, this isn't didn't just pop up in this latest iteration of it.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people skated under the radar for a long time until some of these things did become more mainstream, and then they've been looked at a little bit more closely. I don't think she's always been the hero we thought she might have been once.
Oh no, absolutely no. She's been at the forefront of transphobia for years and years and years.
Yes.
But it's taken
this moment.
Yeah, at this moment, it's become a lot more. It used to be kind of couched a little bit It used to be kind of, it used to be put, it used to be kind of like presented under this. Well, I just care about women, and
Right.
I don't mind if trans people exist. That's fine. I just am worried about women's safety. And it's like, and now it's just like a full scale attack on anyone who may or may not be trans just because they may or may not be trans. Like it's so mask off.
It is. And what's interesting also is if you want to get like, here's my women in gender studies cap being put on, right? Because you also look at the women that they choose to target by saying that they used to be men. And it's always women, usually women who don't fit the notion of what the ideal female should be.
Yes,
which is
exactly.
demure and quiet, takes up a little space, isn't loud, all these different, attributes. Is usually fair-skinned, is possibly blonde, right? And so it's always women, often women of color, or women who have more masculine, what we traditionally masculine features, like square jaws. Like I'm sure Mariel Hemingway would have been, and a candidate. Barbara Bush. I think Barbara Bush is a man. It's like, so where'd the 4 kids come from?
It's wild, and especially with the boxer, they're saying that she might. People are just making up stories, like they're aware of like what her genetic code is. It's just it's the most craziest thing, and it's like you said, it's like I've got like PCOS, right? So PCOS will give you chin hairs. I have like if I don't pluck it, I've got a full on beard. That's masculine. And again, it's like. If you don't fit, like exactly like you said, if you don't fit into this rigid box of almost like this idea of like the traditional woman, it's got this kind of like 1950s thing that I see in my head, like exactly like you described, like dresses, stays at home, does all of that. If you don't fit into that, then you're not a real woman. It's wild.
Yeah, it is. And you had mentioned the trad wife movement earlier. And I kind of first stumbled upon the trad wife movement back in 2020 when I noticed Alana Pettit, the British woman, who was kind of like the first trad wife I saw. But because she's English, she did a lot of nationalist stuff, right? She would have like pictures of Jubilee parties and little cakes she had made and all the tradition. She was all about tradition. And then you look at them in the United States and you've got the various different hybrids of that here. But at the end of the day, they all point to the identity of whiteness. Even though they all like to pretend they have no idea what you're talking about when you bring that up. I'm not sure how we got off on the tangent of that, but
it's all interesting. This is what these streams usually go like. We'll start talking about one thing and it inevitably leads you somewhere else.
Oh, we were talking about the mama bear stuff.
Yes, the whole mom part.
Yeah, but that's when you get to be not feminine. That's when you get to step out of that ideal feminine mold, because the ideal feminine also is the fierce mom and the devoted wife. Right. So you're going to do anything in defense of your family, in defense of your kids. And if that means standing up in front of a school board, speaking like, a drunk sailor because you're so vulgar, you get a pass. You get a pass. You get a high five because you are a fierce mama bear. Just there to protect the kids.
I'm going to play another clip again, because this leads us nicely onto very familiar territory. So let's watch this clip.
I hope that your documentary comes out in time, but to be truth, I think the shift will come before then. And maybe this trip is just meant to help you raise your consciousness. I mean, continue to make your movie and do all that, but when the shift comes, it will literally, we're going to shift into a new world, heaven on earth.
So this idea of heaven on earth, or in other words 5D, the fifth dimension, and it's probably something that a lot of people that are watching are already familiar with, but what does it mean to Ivonne specifically? What's her idea of heaven on earth?
She says that heaven on earth is when disclosure is going to come. Right.
And what does she define as, because amongst all of these conspiracy groups, they all talk about disclosure. So the UFO community has disclosure, the QAnon has disclosure. For Ivonne,
it's about systems are going to be exposed. The truth is going to come out. And I've asked her how that's going to happen. And she thinks that like someone like Trump, for example, who she does not particularly admire as a person, and in fact didn't vote for him the first time around and the whole bit, but she eventually grew to see him as a white hat. And she believes that it's going to be proven, disclosure was that it would be proven that he was still president, that he would kind of step in at the shadows, and all of these hidden systems would be exposed and they would start to crumble, and that humanity would be set free from the slavery that they've been held in, the bondage that the elite cabal has kept them in, and move into heaven on earth. Earth in 5D is heaven on earth. And where she first got that from, I believe, is Love Has Won, the internet.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you.
Yeah. And I didn't know that at first because I hadn't heard of Love Has Won in 2021. And when I started paying closer attention to what Ivonne was posting, she starts posting a pyramid candle one day and these chakra candles. And she started saying, God is a woman. I'm like, oh, is this a feminist thing? What are we doing with this? I couldn't figure it out because it was so, again, like, how is this woman being a feminist based on these other things she was saying? And but eventually I was talking to her and she told me that she had met a group online in 2020 called Love Is One, and that she had got online looking for alternative remedies to boost her immune system and also to assist in helping her finish losing weight because she had gastric bypass in 2017 and was still trying to lose the last 80 pounds or something. And Love Is One, who was internet savvy and had been a presence online since 2012, 14, something like that. Yeah. They recognized QAnon and COVID right away as recruitment tools. Because if you look back on their Twitter account, you see right away in February of 2020, they are promoting colloidal silver as a remedy for either COVID or to keep you from getting it.
Yeah, they got a nice letter from the FDA over that.
Yes. And they also were doing WWG1 stuff on some of their posts as early as 18 and 19, which I look at as signaling. So that hey guys, we're QAnon friendly, and which is what everybody was doing, is using this as a recruitment.
Oh, they would talk about it constantly, and I mean, so I've watched every single one of their live streams, probably some of them multiple times. I don't even think about. It's okay.
Like 12 hours long.
There's only 2,700 of them. I only watched all of them. It's fine. I know more about Love Has Won than anybody in the whole world needs to know. I probably know, there's other people that know about it, but I know more than anybody actually needs to know about that group. And yet they were promoting that really early. But the thing about Amy, Mother God, Love Has Won, is she would take anything and mold it into her belief system. Yeah. Just constant.
And I saw Ivonne parroting a lot of the things that had come from Love Is One. She did pay to have etheric surgery done with Mother God twice.
Yeah,
twice for $88.88.
Yeah, angel numbers.
Angel numbers. Also, I guess we're shout out to the Lionsgate portal that just happened on stage.
Oh, God.
I never wanted to know any of this stuff. Thank you very much.
I know, it's too much. So when did she have her etheric surgery? What year was that?
That was shortly before Amy died. So Amy died in spring of 21. She would have had that done in like late summer, early fall of 2020.
Did she have it done with Amy, or was it with?
Well, who knows now, since it's done remotely.
Yeah, so did she not have a Zoom meeting with anyone?
No, she didn't have anything. She paid them. They disappeared for a few hours and came back and said they'd done it. And she told me she really didn't feel any different, but
well, that's because Amy would be steaming drunk after drinking like 10 beers and drinking half a bottle of vodka. She would be passed out drunk, but the followers believed that she was actually on a spaceship with Robin Williams, and that's where they would kind of
Cryon of the Magnetic Service.
Cryon of Magnetic Service, Saint Germain. They were all there. Patrick Swayze.
I heard Prince and Christopher Reeves are assisting now.
Yeah, Patrick Swayze, I think, did the animals. He did the pet
Okay.
etheric surgeries.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely wild. But that was interesting to me finding out about Ivonne, because while I was researching Love Has Won, there were loads of like whispers about somebody that was involved with them had been at January 6th, and I
Hmm.
never knew who it was, because I only kind of focused my research on a very like the core.
My
The
guess is
galactic
it wasn't her.
team.
I don't think she was very well known necessarily. Oh, she
Right.
might have been though, because this is how I found Love Is One. When I was following Ivonne on Facebook, she was one of my only friends on my research account. I just was following her because I was talking to her, and
Mm-hmm.
then I decided to follow someone else that she was retweeting a lot of. Well, it turns out that person was the ambassador for Love Is One from South Africa, and so yes,
What was his name? I
yeah,
can't remember
Taryn,
the name.
yeah, Taryn.
Yeah.
And so I followed that person. I still had no idea what was happening. And within a few days, I had like a ton of friend requests from people who had Archaea in their name, right?
Yeah.
So I immediately saw that and said, okay, so this means something. Let me figure out what this means. Once you have more than one or two, you realize it means something, and you look it up. And I realized it's a female version of Archangel.
Yeah.
And so then I started to figure out what's happening. And I went back and looked more closely at those candles and and then I found the Wayback Machine and then learned what I needed to learn about Love Has Won. But what was interesting about that is Ivonne took the Love Has Won experience in 2020 and then translated it into the real world in 2021. After January 6th, after getting further down that conspirituality rabbit hole, she went to Mount Shasta for the Lionsgate portal on August 8th, 2021. Mm-hmm. And while there, she happened to see a group all in white around a drum doing some kind of ceremony, and she wanted to see what it was all about. She's like, they know something, and I want to know what they know. And she trudged over there, and she met a medicine woman, a white medicine woman from Nevada, who was doing these ceremonies with these groups that she would put together, and they were doing toad poison ceremonies. There's an actual name for it, but I keep calling it toad poison, so I forgot the actual real word. That is literally a toad poison ceremony, where they smoke these crystals that these toads put out, and it's a psychedelic experience. And she did it twice and got violently ill, she said, the first time. And then but each time she did it, she's doing these things with intention, with the assistance of a shaman. And I think that when you're doing things with intention, you can probably create neural pathways that help it make it easier to get where you're going, right?
Absolutely.
And this was something that continued for a while, because then she signed up for a 7-month spiritual warrior training series with this woman that she met, gave her thousands of dollars for that. And this is a woman who had no money because she quit her job and quit paying her bills because she didn't want to be a slave to the system anymore. That was where some of this sovereign citizen language that kind of seeps into all the movements now came in, where she's being told, don't pay your taxes, don't register your car, don't do any of those things. And so she didn't. So, her car is basically in repossession status, and she's getting pulled over because she has no current registration. And it just, the self-induced stress of all that is just kind of a lot to even think about for me. I can't. It just makes me. Yeah.
She's lucky she didn't end up, with the Love Has Won people, because they were recruiting.
Oh, she under the right circumstances she could have. She even mentioned that. But she's a mother of 5, grandmother of 11, and she was married, and a part of her community. And I think, but I think that under the right circumstances, absolutely.
One of they had so many people come and go from there, but one of the more well-known stories was the I know her name's Amanda. She ran the Rising Above Love Has Won, kind of like a help group, kind of collating information on Love Has Won. She got into it because her brother was just kind of fell down the rabbit hole.
Is he the one that they found wandering around out in
and he left his wife, left his kid, went out. I thought he was on this spiritual mission from God, and gets to the Love Has Won house, which can only be described as pure and utter chaos. I mean, it's really like not even in like there was definitely a 100% abuse going on there, but like more in a way of like nobody really had an idea what they were doing. You've got this, and the thing about Love Has Won is they had their audience, and the people that went to join them were so young. Like,
yeah, I did notice that too.
A lot of them were like millennials, younger than me, and I'm mid 30s.
And many of them were educated.
Yeah. Like a lot of them very, very affluent, and kind of just gave up everything and went to join Amy. And he's gone to this house, and it's first of all, Amy and Jason who was Father God, still claims that he is Father God. Well, actually now he says that he's both Father and Mother God combined, so he's carrying her essence around.
I've always wondered if he was Father God, why wasn't he able to expunge his felony record?
Right? Why is he living in a tent? Like out in? It all makes perfect sense. But this guy gets to this house, and I can't imagine like what you would expect versus what you get, because you've got Amy Carlson who lays in bed all day watching their live streams, yelling at the screen, getting high in bed, or doing mushroom trips, drinking copious amounts. And then you've got, all of these other people that are kind of like running around after her, but it's almost, like almost like a weird kind of like frat house type of vibe as well. Like nobody really got an idea what they're doing.
Yeah, I saw that when I watched the bunch of videos I've seen, and it seems so chaotic and awful. I couldn't. It gives me anxious even watching it.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that is out there on their streams. I mean, they deleted all of their streams off their YouTube channel for a long time, and they've just started bringing some back, but they don't put on all of them. And I mean, some of them, and there's ones that for some reason never really like became kind of like clipped in. I didn't put them in my video. They weren't in the HBO doc, and they're not in any other kind of like YouTube videos. These clips are just utterly horrific, and the level of like overt racism, homophobia, and anti-Semitism is like I mean, there's streams of Aurora and Hope, who are these two, again, like young, relatively affluent, normal people, attractive, normal people who were just sat there talking about, like, I'm not going to repeat it on this stream, but some of the most, think about some of the most anti-Semitic stuff you could think of, and then turn it up to like 100. It just utterly horrifying. And then, it still kind of like baffles me. And again, Amy, she was very, not to make this all about Love Has Won, but she was very, trauma was a massive part of her life.
Right.
And, she never really, I don't know whether she got any like formal mental health diagnoses, but there's a lot of things that happened in her backstory that led her to where she was. And again, like it kind of throws up similar themes with the two women in the Conspiracists. Is if they had access to some form of help, like specifically I'm thinking of Tammy, would they have gotten to this point? Because like Tammy's definitely a woman that's shaped by a lot of her experiences and like her economic
status. I think it was loneliness in lots of ways. It was when you were isolated like she was, without money and transportation, in an area where there isn't a lot to do. I think she found online as a social activity, that's where she spent time getting to know people at some point, especially after 2020. Because prior to 2020, she had a stint with drugs. So she was doing that. But then she got herself off drugs and found conspiracies instead. As far as trauma goes, that was something that everyone I spoke to had a lot of trauma in their background, much of it unprocessed. But then, I did a thread on that about a year and a half ago about trauma was something similar with these women. And there was a lot of people who jumped in with a very valid question, and that's, I suffered a ton of trauma in my life, and I didn't storm the Capitol, right? Yeah. And that's a valid point. And I think that was why after the first year of hovering above and trying to tell stories or to understand people based on publicly available information and caricatures that made sense based on patterns of other larger groups, you miss the individual stories and you miss the nuances that actually are important in these cases. Because I can see where these two particular women we're talking about entered this space from completely different directions. And it's taken over the lives, and in Ivonne's case, really done some detrimental, some bad damage to it long term. Tammy is a funny one because she's actually gives me hope now, and I would say since Sabrina's death, actually, Tammy was able to get some mental health treatment through the probation office. It's unfortunate that it took going to jail and having a probation officer to secure that sort of service for her, but that's what happened. And since then, she recognizes that living out, she'd always been very creative in keeping herself entertained. There's a lot of videos of Tammy from winter of 23, winter of 22 even, going hobbit hunting in her forest. There's a woods behind her house where she puts on like her waders, and a couple of them she's carrying a machete in case she's got to cut back some bushes. But she goes on a hobbit hunt where she leaves Pop-Tarts and various leftovers from the refrigerator as an offering, and then leaves and goes back the next day to film. And she kind of knows nothing's going to have happened, but you can tell there's a piece of her that hopes that maybe there's something exciting coming her way. Always slight disappointment, but you can see these elaborate excursions she'll do in videos and live stream. But that's her way of connecting with people, because she doesn't have family vacations to post. She just has her hobbit hunts and her fairy hunts, and sometimes she takes her grandchildren. So, she's the type who the Mormon sisters came to her daughter-in-law's house one day when she was there and Tammy said, "Oh, you can come see me at my house," and gave them the address. So of course she was entertaining these sisters for every week for several weeks because she said it was company. And she'd get invited to dinners at people's houses. And she's like, yeah, when I get bored, I'm just going to take out the tarot cards and I'm sure they'll disappear. So that you see, like, there's this desperation to, she's doing a lot better since she went to prison even, and has gotten mental health care help. She started taking some dancing lessons and like more normal things to do.
That's such a huge part of it is community.
Yeah.
And again, there's
so important.
Yeah. And I get a lot of times people have a very dismissive attitude of like, oh, people just join a cult, it's stupid. That's why they join a cult. And it's like, you don't, like, a lot of people, that feeling of loneliness, emptiness, and when you find people that will listen to you, you're not gonna be on like high alert for things like love bombing or being like things like coercive control. You can kind of overlook all of that if you want company, you want community, and that is the thing that's so important. And that's the thing that I get you. I don't know if you agree. This is just my opinion, but like our current society is so fragmented. We don't put such a emphasis on community, and having like a strong community, having safety net for people, it is super, super important. And when you don't, and when you have a very individualistic, cutthroat, glorifying, being individual over the community, it just leads to people feeling completely isolated and empty. And that will eventually, this isn't to say this is the only driver of why people join cults. There are many, many reasons, but I've seen it in my research that looking for that community is a massive thing that draws people in and stops them from being able to see the things that maybe me and you look at and go, that's a bloody red flag. Like, that's not good.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. A lot of it is the community aspect of it, and that's one reason so many of these women got in trouble in the first place for January 6th, is they were so interested in letting people know that they were there, that they were live streaming from inside the Capitol to Facebook, and that's why so many of them use profile picture frames that say something about January 6th to identify them as a participant, because they found a community. Tammy and Ivonne both have told me they've never fit in anywhere before. They never felt like they truly belonged or were accepted in different spaces, not even church. And so I think, when there's this anonymity that the internet offers, and you can adjust to your comfort level of how much of yourself you want to share, and every day that's what you're doing with your time. The idea of getting someone out of something like that without a replacement is really not realistic, because if I'm talking to Tammy, we're not talking conspiracies, and she's not doing it online. But once I'm gone and I'm what is she doing? She's right back on Telegram. However, the good news is, and what does give me hope more, is that as this therapist has been working with her over the last 9-10 months, Tammy on her own has decided to spend less time online. Like she deleted her Telegram channel. She'll still go on Telegram, but she doesn't have her own channel anymore. She's not very active on Facebook either, because she's finding some real world opportunities to get involved in, and it's making a difference. And she has a couple of people in her life now that she can rely on in a time of crisis, or if she needs advice or help navigating systems. She has a couple of people she can call.
That's like so important, because it's like that's the difference. That's the thing that can really help, and it may not help in every single case. It may not, stop everybody. There are some people that may just head down the dark path no matter what, but making sure that there's opportunities for people, especially people that are just totally disenfranchised, and in Tammy's case for good reason. Like, after experiences like that, you would, if I had gone through any of those experiences, I would find it incredibly hard to trust like any form of like system, like establishment, because of when you've seen that level of like corruption up front, and it's affected you and your family and the people that you love. How can you blame somebody for then their feelings of not trusting?
Right. Yeah, it was interesting because one of the ways I got to know Tammy, or one of the things we first started talking about, was I actually reached out to Tammy because I knew so much about her on paper, that her co-defendant from January 6th committed suicide in July of 2022 after they had taken the plea together. They both took the plea, and then he committed suicide. And I knew so much about her life that I wondered how she was handling that. And so we were in a Facebook group together, and I reached out in Messenger and asked her how she was handling it. And we started talking through Messenger for a long time about that over the next several days. And then at some point she divulged to me, as she was getting ready for her own sentencing that was supposed to be in September, she took the plea. Tammy took a plea. She was going to have her own sentence in September. She told me her attorney had told her she needed 15 character letters, like 15 letters from people who said something nice about her. And she said, I'm really embarrassed to admit this, but I don't think I have 15 people who would to ask to write for me. And I sat there for a second and I thought about that. And I'm like, I have 15 friends left to ask, Because at some point you hit this age in your 50s and your kids are grown, and many friends, many adult friends are made through your children, right? Yeah. And then you're kind of sitting around like, what am I doing here now? And who do I actually know? Who is actually my friend now? And so we talked a lot about that. And that was one of the first times talking to Tammy that I could relate to her. I could think about that and thought, like, who would that be? Who would you want to write letters for you for the judge? And so I started thinking about that, and I'm thinking about her life and thinking. So this has been a real eye opener for me in lots and lots of ways too. It's been good for me to temper my own judgment. It's in lots of ways, not just the January 6th stuff, but the belief systems. How is one set of spiritual beliefs more crazy than another? Many of them are far-fetched when you look at some of the ways they're presented. And so I've kind of come full circle on some of that, where things I would have said were just absolutely batshit crazy. I can see ways where maybe some of it is harmless if you can temper some of the other stuff that goes along with it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the struggle here, because there are some ways to make online communities productive for people. But there's so many people out there looking to exploit each other that it makes it a pretty, makes it a landmine, really.
Absolutely. I'm going to play another clip from this. Yeah, I'm going to play this clip because it kind of fits in with what we're talking about.
I just watched a video that was on CBS News back in the 90s about weather manipulation.
Wait, weather manipulation?
Yeah, they control the weather. They modify HARP. There's a set.
Who controls the weather?
The elite.
The elite controls the weather.
Well, the elite are basically, there's 13 bloodlines of families that the reptilians have used to control the world.
Your face in that kind of says it all.
I know. I've learned that my face is way too expressive.
That's kind of, I can imagine that I would have kind of the same thing. I'd be like,
you're cutting up. I didn't hear you.
I can imagine that I would kind of have the same kind of reaction to hearing that.
Yeah. Someone told me I look like the emoji with the teeth like that.
You do a little, but it's, again, like, what is, you don't debunk these. And that's one thing that I really enjoyed about this documentary is, even though there is you can tell that there is, a position that the documentary takes, i.e. not endorsing any conspiracy that is presented, but there is no kind of like talking head that comes in and tries to debunk everything. Like, it's not about that. It's not about the debunking the belief system. And what I just am interested in, like, what your personal opinions are on kind of like the idea of like debunking a lot of these theories. Is it pointless?
You're cutting off pretty badly, but I think what I heard you say is, how do I feel about debunking their theories?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I think you have to remember what my motivation was here.
Right.
And that was to go into their space, into their culture, into their communities, to observe how they interacted in those communities, to try to understand what I was seeing. I had the luxury then of getting to know these women, so I could actually ask them point blank sometimes what I was seeing. So my purpose wasn't to go in and try to change them. Right? I'm doing ethnography, anthropology, like a study of these communities. Yeah. And when I say study, I need to be really clear, because a lot of people will be like, how are you doing a study with two people? These are case studies. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing a scientific study. I'm not proving anything. Participant observation is a qualitative method where you do go and observe over time to try to understand meanings of what you're seeing. So I just want to make that really clear, that that's what I was trying to do. And it was nice because my participants were so open about themselves that it was easy, if I was confused, to just ask. And so I think because of the way I entered this, I could compartmentalize the part of me that wanted to correct or to educate, because it wasn't really it wasn't my place to insert myself on their lives and then try to change them. That wasn't what I was trying to do. I wanted to understand them. And so, like I said, there have been a handful of times when someone has asked me about something specifically. So I will find a resource to share that has information rather than trying to give my opinion of it. But that's about the extent of it. Now, in the film, you did see me pushing back on a couple of things that were said, because they were things that were asked of me directly in that process, where I was being asked how I either thought about something or felt about something. And in those cases, I'll be honest. I don't mislead people like that. I will tell you what I think. Yeah. And that I wouldn't say it drew conflict, but it was the first time I got pushback from Ivonne, for example. She didn't hold that against me. She just, was able to say that she's going to 5D and I'm probably staying in 3D, which I already came to that conclusion at some point on the road anyway. So, I don't really have to say a whole lot, to just be honest about myself and give honest answers. And they can figure it out pretty quickly how different we are.
Absolutely.
And I don't think the other thing is, not a lot of questions were asked. I think that there were many of these, and I say both because there were actually so many people I talked to over the course of time. But when it came down to choosing who I was going to focus on, so many of them were too predictable. They were so obvious and so self-serving in their purpose. And it was all about becoming a social media influencer or fundraising off of it or whatever they were doing, that didn't teach me anything. I wasn't learning anything from them. These women both taught me a lot. And that's why I was able to do it for 3 years with them. And, it's made me ask a lot of questions along the way. As you see in the film, when Ivonne says, how much I've done for her, for example, which is just basically showing up at her trial and her sentencing, even though I was writing a book. And I had to grapple with a lot of that too. Of what does it mean to be someone's friend? What is a friend? Because a friend, we all have varying levels of friendship with people. Some friendships are completely transactional. Other friendships, you show your absolute deepest part of who you are. Some are always surface level and just meant for fun and entertainment, right? And so I think this has made me really have to stop and think about those concepts, which I was not prepared to do at all. I'm still grappling with that somewhat, of who gets to be your friend, who's a friend, and what that actually mean at the end of the game. I can tell you right now, I believe that Ivonne would be there for me anytime I needed her. Even though we are polar opposite, I don't believe almost all of the things she says. I care about her though as a person and a human, and I've seen a part of her that I wouldn't have seen if I'd only followed what was shown right after January 6th.
Absolutely.
Or after I've read articles and interviews with her, because I built a relationship with her for 3 years, And so I think the valuable piece of that for me has been to show that each year of this project has been something has landed in a different spot. At the end of each year, I can see when something changed for me, right? And now I'm in that final stage where I'm wrapping it all up and I'm left with my own feelings, or how has this affected me? And how has this, because it's been incredibly time consuming. I can be very obsessive about it. I also feel a sense of responsibility now. See, and that's the getting involved part. Is once you get involved, there's a sense of responsibility to still be there for people, which in my case is manageable with these women. I have developed. I'm keenly aware, and that I sit around hoping the best for Tammy every day. I keep hoping something really great's going to happen in her life because she could use a break. And then I look at the memes she shares and I listen to the things she says. And I'm like, how am I doing? How do I mesh these two parts of myself? And it's been hard. And so I keep back.
It is really difficult.
It is.
I don't know can you hear me okay?
I can now.
Okay, cool. Because I told you I have a friend who believes in a lot of this stuff, and over the years it's been not necessarily, but it is difficult when you've got a friend that believes in this kind of stuff, and I was friends with her before I even started doing any of this kind of research. And it is difficult because you have to balance the person that the person that you get to know, the person that you like, the person that they are, and then these conspiracies and things that you might not necessarily agree with, some things that are inherently harmful, and that it's not, you're never going to kind of convince them that it's not real, so you just you're left just kind of trying to just be there as a human for another person. It's very hard.
Yeah, it is. But I will say that avoid leaving people in isolation because they aren't passing, they can't meet you on every level, isn't healthy either. And I have seen an actual real improvement with someone like Tammy. Number one, because of herself and her own determination to bring herself out of the hole she's been in, but also because there have been a handful of people she's met online that have been there for her when she needs them. And I think that, there's so many different disciplines that come into play here between psychology, sociology, and a psychologist could help a lot explaining some of these different dynamics, right? But again, I think the biggest factors of who is drawn to this sort of stuff are people who are seeking identity, participation, belonging, and need a sense of community. And that will attract people of varying degrees of commitment to the movement, right? But I think if I had to guess, and if I had to use what I know to make a prediction about the future, I don't think either Tammy or Ivonne will ever do anything like they did on J6 again.
Right.
I think Ivonne, even, who is the true believer, and it is easier for her to justify behaviors based on her belief system. Even Ivonne says that during her sentencing, she was able to see something from another perspective when she saw the evidence entered in her trial. She was able to see law enforcement's perspective because the film is being shot from their body-worn cameras. Mm-hmm. And so she could see what it looked like for them to have that crowd screaming at them. She could see what it looked like to have them pleading with people to move her off the line, and so that she didn't get hurt. And so she was able to respect that part of it. It doesn't negate everything else, certainly. But I think if you can help nurture someone's ability to see things from a different perspective, that maybe you won't stop them from having really out there beliefs. And when I say out there beliefs, I'm not talking about UFOs and alien DNA. I'm talking about the hate and the division and the culture wars and the demonizing people because they're different than you. That's what I'm talking about. She can believe in UFOs and aliens till she's blue in the face. That doesn't harm anyone, right?
Unfortunately, sometimes they get a little bit too interconnected.
Yeah, that's true. We can go off the deep end on anything. We can go off the deep end on anything. So but I mean, I could accept out there beliefs or beliefs that are non-mainstream. Yeah. It's the culture war stuff that's the hard part to reconcile, because that's when I say, okay, well, what is a friend? Is a friend someone I'm going to go to lunch with who's going to go on a transphobic rant? No, I won't. And so that's a different, that's where, I guess that's when you have to look at the different kinds of what friendship can mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to play one last clip from the Conspiracists.
We've had lots of really great conversations that if you were to listen to them, they have nothing to do with conspiracies. They're about our lives as middle-aged women, and it sounds like we're friends.
But it feels like that's changed now, because every single conversation since I've been on this trip with you, which is now 6 days, there's not one single conversation which isn't about a conspiracy theory.
So adrenochrome is taken from our blood, and the younger and the more pure blood, like children, the more potent it is.
So yeah, it's kind of like you were saying, like, who do you want to go, for lunch with? Because with somebody like, who has a lot of these beliefs, and we were talking about this a little bit before, it is relentless. Like it's almost like you're being bashed over the head with it, because after one conspiracy comes another, and it can just be like, I wonder, like, how did you, throughout that road trip, how did you kind of protect your peace? Because it's a lot to deal with, and there's a very emotional scene, where you kind of can see like the it's starting to really get to you.
Yeah, it does get to you after a while, and I wouldn't say it's so much hearing the conspiracy stuff that got tedious. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to watch any more YouTube videos. Yeah. I didn't want to hear any more YouTube videos. I never want to hear another YouTube video outside of stuff like this ever again, quite frankly. But it did get tedious. She didn't do it. Again, Ivonne was savvy enough to know her audience. So we wouldn't be in a restaurant and have her start to talk to a server that way. Although ironically, in Idaho, when we got back to Idaho, we went to lunch at a restaurant, and the server started talking to, he saw Liz's camera. And so I asked something about what that was. And Ivonne shared that we were doing a documentary about some, and he starts talking more and more until he starts sharing his own trauma with us, some story. And I'm like, we don't need any more of that today. Thanks. So he finishes that and walks away. He comes back again and he looks at Ivonne and he said, "Are you part of the 144? Oh, well, I almost fell on my face because no one knows what that is. And so for him to spontaneously come up and say, "Are you part of the 144, which is 144,000, which she believes are like the beings of light that came to Earth. It depends on, again, 144 means something different to all different communities.
Yeah.
It has a religious component.
Yeah, it's biblical. It's biblical origin.
For Ivonne,
but it's definitely been co-opted. That's Love Has Won co-opted that. Every new age group's
that's where she got it.
Yeah.
So she believes that that's part of the light beings who come to Earth to help show the way. She believes she's a way shower. She believes it's generational. That the first wave was during World War II. The second wave was us in the 60s and 70s who were born, and then the new one is the younger generation. I guess
that's very what's her name? New
Dolores
Age
Cannon.
Yes, that's it. Dolores Cannon, the first waivers and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's where it comes from. Which is really interesting in that documentary. I don't know if you noticed that with the Dolores Cannon conversation, when she's talking about reproductive rights, when Ivonne is speaking of reproductive rights. And this is another thing that I find so interesting with conspiracy theorists, how they will take things and run with it until it affects them personally, and then they can morph it. And so Ivonne says, right, she's fully pro-life, but has forgiven herself for something she had done years back, because Dolores Cannon says that the soul doesn't enter the body until the time of birth. But if that's the case, then why does anyone have a problem with abortion in the first place? Because it's a soulless pregnancy, wouldn't it be? But that doesn't, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many pieces of logic that just don't matter. There's another scene in the film where two of them are talking, another woman who's in it, they're talking about JFK Jr. and a man who's commonly thought of by QAnon followers to be JFK Jr.
And the strange thing that happened is he was behind him when he got shot.
Yes,
that was the first thing I thought, and that's the point where I thought, I know too much about this crazy land, that the first thing I thought was not Trump's got shot. I thought, that's JFK Jr.
Yeah, right. And so the interesting part of that conversation, these two women are talking about this other woman who's met him. And she says, but isn't JFK Jr. a lot taller than Vincent Fusco? And then the other one goes, I don't know, maybe. And they're like, well, maybe they just swap IDs and one goes one time and the other goes. Maybe that's like, but I thought he's a lot taller. It's like, is anyone even paying attention? Nah.
They don't even look like each other at all.
It's crazy.
For people that don't know what we're talking about, what's his name? Vincent
Fusco.
Vincent Fusco is a guy that some people within the Q movement believe is JFK Jr. And if you want to see him, you can obviously Google him, but he was standing right behind Donald Trump when he got shot. In Pennsylvania. Yeah.
What was weird about that with Vincent Fusco thing is they just it's watching them question each other and just dismiss anything that doesn't fit. They could just, is anyone paying attention? Doesn't matter. One of them suggests that maybe he's reincarnated, and that has happened before when Ivonne had talked about them taking DNA in prison. Everyone, she said they're going to use that to clone us and kill us, and then they clone us and they have this compliant slave race for themselves. And I think so what they think cloning means, I think, is almost like where you put like something over a person and you lift it up and now there's two of them, right? They don't recognize that cloning means growing it in a petri dish and having it go through different life stages and cycles. And so I'm trying to imagine, I keep wondering, like, well, how do they think that Vincent Fusco has been JFK Jr. has been reincarnated into Vincent Fusco? Because I guess I just think he comes back as a full-on adult if he's been cloned, right?
Well, or that it makes no sense.
Yeah, there's nothing.
So much of it's also kind of involved with like the whole med bed thing as well. Like the holographic med bed regenerates part of your which is wild.
Which Ivonne was waiting for the med beds in 2022 when her mom passed from COVID. She thought for sure the med beds would be there by then. But they weren't.
I've tried to. I've been in the process of like researching and like trying to get interviews with people for a medbed video. I tried to get in contact with the main medbed place in Pennsylvania. The Tesla Medbed Center. Mm-hmm. I also I also like lined up a bunch of interviews, but then they backed out of like some of these main people. I can't remember what the guy's name is, but he's been on like loads of shows, people that peddle these med beds. And it was just interesting to me that they were like, oh yeah, we'll definitely do an interview with you, and then just kind of like never responded when I tried to follow up on it. Because I was like, I want to talk. If I'm going to make a video about it, I want to talk to these people. I want to find out exactly what it is that they're selling.
Right.
But what they're selling is, I mean, you want to talk about a scam. That is one of the biggest scams of all, and a scam like that can only exist in a place. Yeah, there's a reason. The National Health Service in England isn't at a great point at the moment because it has been underfunded for God knows how long, but the medbed conspiracy hasn't taken hold here as much as it has done in the United States. There's definitely still people that believe in it 100%, but I feel like some people might disagree with me, but my general feeling is that a conspiracy theory like that is much more prone to taking off in the US, where, you know, you go to the United States. I saw like a Instagram reel the other day. A woman went to hospital. She stayed there overnight to have a baby. She got a bill for $33,000. You know, that's the environment where a conspiracy theory like a holographic medical bread that's free for everybody to use, that will cure you of anything, could really take off.
Right. And that's where some of these systems that fail their citizens are partially, you know, I wouldn't say responsible for conspiracies, but definitely give fodder for conspiracists.
Yeah.
So, and that's the problem. There's so many, just like with the juvenile justice system in Pennsylvania and Tammy. And this is just one of many stories like that with her, with the system. And so you see these systems that keep failing people over and over. Mental health care even is another one, right? If you're poor, good luck finding it. Because you know, and good therapists often don't take insurance, so you have to pay cash at an hourly rate of $250 or something. And so and we don't have a social safety net. And you're right. You earlier said something about fragmented. Life is so fragmented. Yeah, in the United States, when you have people working sometimes 2-3 jobs to make ends meet, there's no time for social activities with friends. You can barely survive. I think that's part of the problem too, right? And fewer and fewer people go to in-person churches. And after COVID, you know, how many online ministries popped up and never left after that? Yeah. And so, you know, in fact, Ivonne rejected the church. She was an evangelical Christian after she left the Marines in the early 2000s. And she had been at a small church in Idaho for years, like, you know, 20 some years. She was not just a congregant, she was a leader, you know, because Ivonne's got to be at the top of pretty much everything she does. She's going to be a leader. But it was when COVID came along and government restrictions shut down the church. And she said, and she was reprimanded by the youth pastor for not wearing her mask around the kids. And first of all, how dare anyone tell her what to do? And second of all, how dare the government overreach to shut down the church? And if the government shut down the churches, what that means is that the church is an extension of a man-made institution. It's an institution that's going to listen to what politicians are saying, not what God is saying, because God would never close his door to his children, is what she told me. And so she went online and she got involved with Love is One. She got involved with other messianic online ministries, and everything went off the deep end for her. You know, I mean, talk about this woman's life being really upended through all of this. And this is where the personal trauma does come in also. There's lots of that. But the internet in 2020 offered her a complete escape hatch to make sense of a reality that no longer made sense to her in the real world, the things that were happening in her life. And she made so many decisions that were permanent almost, you know, like these weren't just little silly things. I mean, like big things like, oh, I'm a slave to the system. If I'm paying my mortgage, let me stop. And, you know, 9 months later, your house is repoed. And you're living, and now you're buying a camp trailer, moving it onto someone's land in the middle of a field in Idaho, where in the winters, your water pipes are bursting. And you have no adequate heat.
And now you're in jail.
Right. You know, and so you see how detrimental these belief systems can actually be in real life.
Yeah.
Not just the destruction of relationships, even, but that distrust of government, that distrust of systems, has you doing some really crazy stuff that hurts nobody in the end but yourself.
Do you think that, again, going back to, because this is, I guess, one of the things that I always find to be kind of a bit like underreported is like, and I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but that like distrust in institutions, because like, again in Tammy's case, you can't really blame her because the institutions have failed every step of the way. And then generally, you know, like I just think like I grew up, you know, one of my earliest childhood memories is watching 9/11 on the TV, and then the war on terror, and you know the whole kind of pretext to going into Iraq built on an absolute lie. And when you, I guess like a lot of people, when you've got this like long record of government actually lying, these institutions that are supposed to be looking out for the people and they're not looking out for the people, it kind of inherently leads to this distrust, right? Like you can't blame, I mean, you can definitely blame people for going far down the rabbit hole, but this general distrust of like establishment, and specifically the US government, is kind of rooted in, it's somewhat of a reality. Like I'm not trying to excuse all of it.
No, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. And I think, again, I don't know enough about all of this. And this you could go on with this stuff forever here. I mean, trying to understand it. Again, I'm looking at the generational piece of it and why so many women my age have gone off the deep end. I think, you know, you kind of watch growing up and you watch these different things take place and watching different things not come to fruition that have been promised. Right? Because I never imagined being this age and watching like reproductive rights being taken away from women. I never thought about book burning. You know, I just didn't think these things would be happening in 2024. But you know, but I have enough, I'm rooted in reality enough that I can look and see these things, why these things have happened. And growing up, and you know, we were all teenagers in the 80s under Reagan, right? And so we watched that economic change happen, with the whole way it was supposed to all come back down.
Yeah,
you know,
trickle down economics. Yeah, always back.
That wasn't really going to happen because greed breeds greed.
Yeah.
So now, you know, fast forward, and now people are working 2 or 3 jobs, and employers have been allowed to strip workers' protections all over the place. And now it's common to find, you know, when ACA came out to give everyone medical insurance, or gave everyone the opportunity to purchase it, I should say, at an affordable cost. Not really half the time, but you know, you do that, and now I forgot what I was going to say about that. Systems that broke. Where are we going? There's so many. I mean, this stuff is so confusing.
Well, all of these things kind of lead to a total like disenfranchisement.
Right, and now you've got, you know, Tammy, who doesn't have friends anymore because she's having to work 2 or 3 jobs, and her kids are constantly in jail, so she's taking care of grandchildren, and it's just like everything collapsed.
Yeah.
And there's no one there. There's no one there to save you. Everyone wants someone to come save us. And I think that's been one of the hardest things about becoming an adult, right? Is you realize there's no one there to save you. No. We really are going to save ourselves. The problem is,
it's also kind of this thing that's just accepted amongst everybody. It's like, oh yeah, politicians will just lie. You know, they will just, you will get a politician who will just lie, and you'll get campaign promises that are made but are in most cases not met, and then you have to wait another 4 or 5 years, however long it is, and then you vote again and you hope that something's going to change. You know, like I remember like you know, Barack Obama, and how much hope, that this real like sense of like things are going to change, promised a lot of you know, different things. There was this idea that, you know, life was going to be good. He was going to, you know, one of the big things was he was going to shut down Guantanamo Bay. He was going to be, you know, the anti-war candidate. And I just feel like a lot of people have like just an innate mistrust after years of not for whatever reason, be it bureaucracy, be it, you know, whatever it is. But a lot of people are like, well, none of this, we've been promised all of these things and they never happen. So we don't trust you anymore.
Right.
But unfortunately, that now goes to, so I'm going to trust this absolutely insane conspiracy theory that's even more outlandish than a regular politician's campaign promises.
Yeah, no, it doesn't, well, there's no logic here. This is more about how it makes you feel. You know, it's not a logical situation, but how people feel pushes them into some strange directions sometimes.
Definitely. So how can people, because I've kept you here for 2 hours, so I feel like we should maybe start wrapping it up. But what's the kind of, how are you going to release the documentary, or where can people kind of get updates on it? Like, what's the process of bringing it out to the public? Because it's such a good documentary and really deserves to be seen by a lot of people.
Well, this is not my area. This is the first time I've ever worked with a film. But Page75 Productions in London is the production company that's making the film. It wrapped, it's complete. I believe now they have submitted it to a couple of different festivals and are looking for screenings. Basically, we're looking for people who want to do like a screening where they can get a group in who might be able to help with getting a distributor interested. So that's where we are right now. But nice. Page75 Productions does have a website. The Conspiracists has its own website, theconspiracistsfilm.com.
I'll put all of that in the description so that people can go and find it. And also, I'm assuming that you'll post any kind of updates on it on Twitter absolutely. As well.
Yes.
Awesome. Noelle, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation. I think, like, judging by just the bits of the chat that I've seen, because there's a lot of comments, but people have really enjoyed it. Yeah, people have really enjoyed it. So yeah, I genuinely can't wait for the documentary to be released, because like I said, like, I'm really not making it up. This is a fantastic documentary.
I think it's different. You know, it is a different kind of film, because again, the way I did this was a little strange. It kind of took on a life of its own in the end. And it's okay. I think it's a good thing in some ways, because it is an opportunity. It's made me have to do a lot of thinking, and I'm still thinking. I'm still trying to figure out what this all means to me, and how to take the good pieces of it that I have learned and carry on with that in the future. And it actually has made me slow down a lot more in the real world, and to actually be more empathetic to people in general who are different than me, that I might not want to do that with all the time. Because that's the only way we're going to actually get through some of this, is just try to figure out ways to bring people together more than we have. Because there's just such a huge division right now. There's going to be people who have met me at some of these events I've been at, and are going to find out that that I am a Democrat, that I've been a Democrat since the day I turned 18 and could vote for the first time, right? That I don't believe in a lot of I don't believe in any of the culture war stuff. And so, and then I think they're racist sometimes, right? I have no problem saying that. There's going to be people who find these things out about me who will automatically decide I'm a demon, right? Even though I've treated them respectfully and I've never caused any harm to anyone. But then there's others who, I think, like Ivonne, who realize I am very different than she is, but that we can still appreciate each other's humanity and continue to support each other in the ways that we can, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's probably what I'm going to continue trying to practice more of, is looking for ways to connect with people as opposed to ways to distance myself from people.
I think those are good rules to live by. I'll try and do that, a little bit of that myself. It's hard though sometimes. Yes. Sometimes you want to rage at the world, but sometimes it's better to try and take a little bit of a cooler, more empathetic approach.
And I think that's just it, right? Anybody you walk up to and say, that's crazy, let me tell you how it really is, they're going to automatically be defensive, you know?
That's true.
And so if you let people talk a little bit and ask a lot of questions and express genuine curiosity, if you are, that's how you can get people talking. And maybe then you can have a conversation that leads to some conclusions that might help base people back into reality, even just a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Maybe.
Absolutely. Well, I will leave links to your Twitter page, Page75 Productions in the description, and also the Conspiracists website, and hopefully we can get some screenings organised.
Yeah.
And I will I'll post about them on Twitter as and when they kind of come up, because I genuinely think that everybody should go see this film because it's
Well, thank
fantastic.
you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for making it and being
Thanks
part
for
of
having me. I
making
really
it.
enjoyed talking to you. It was so exciting. I had to fangirl when you asked me to come on here because I found you back when I was researching Ivonne and Love as One, and you had the most deep dive of anybody out there at the time. So
Yeah, that's too much.
Weird Emily.
Weird Emily, I love that. That's me. Awesome. Thank you, Noelle. I will let you go, but thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. I know that a lot of people have been very active in the chat, and I keep seeing like comments and stuff, but I didn't actually end up replying to any of them or highlighting any questions on stream because I was too fixated on what we were talking about. So I'm sorry for that. But I hope that you all enjoyed it. And yeah, this will be the last stream for a little while, just because I'm kind of focusing on videos and different bits. But I do have a new video coming out next week. Hopefully it's about halfway edited at the moment. It's about a 1920s cult. Can you believe it? Which is kind of what I always make videos about now. But it's quite an interesting story. I've never seen a deep dive on it before. And I think I uncovered some new interesting information. So if you want to watch it before anyone else, you can become a patron. It should be up by Tuesday, I'm hoping. If not Tuesday, then it will be Wednesday. And it will hopefully be on YouTube towards the end of next week for people that aren't patrons. Yeah. So with all that being said, thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day.